Okay, thank you very much, colleagues in the room as well as colleagues in the virtual platform. I must say this hybrid platform is a little bit different, not used to, but we are making it work. Okay. So today we're going to chat about the importance of the research question, the aim and the hypothesis, the research objectives, as well as different research designs and methodologies that we can use when formulating our proposal or thinking about the research study that we would like to do. So at the end of this presentation, we have a few outcomes that we would like to work with and that we would like to work within. And amongst these outcomes would be firstly to understand what we mean by research question. And our colleague, Dr. Morton, he gave us a very nice comprehensive way of placing this research question within our problem statement. So it's very important now that colleagues and students, you take some time and just think about your research so that we can understand what the research question is or what our specific research question is and how exactly it is going to play forward in our research. Then we want to formulate appropriate aims and objectives for our study. In hand with that, we would also like to formulate our research hypothesis as well as our research question. The structure of the research objectives, because this is very important. The research objectives needs to be very specific. It needs to be quantifiable, etc. But we'll go in a little bit more detail of that. Then a few colleagues earlier today and some yesterday also touched on the various research designs. So I think in this presentation, I really do want to reinforce the research design that is going to be chosen and how that is going to affect your research study, and then to apply all of these together and synthesize it all together to work in your research methodology. So I usually like to tell my students that this section of your proposal and this section of your research is kind of like the recipe that you're putting forward to be able to bake this wonderfully delicious chocolate cake that we would want to do at the end of our research study. So the more specific we are in terms of the ingredients that we're going to be putting into this chocolate cake, the more ingredients that we put in is going to make the outcome a whole lot better. If we're just going to have a very haphazard recipe that just has like flour and milk, our chocolate cake is not going to be great. So the more information, the more details, the more structure we put into this section, the better the outcome is going to be. And as Dr. Perumal said this morning as well, it's very important in this proposal formulation stage to have guidance and clear guidance. It not only helps you as your student during writing up your proposal, but it also helps you when your treatise, your dissertation, your thesis is going for external examination. And it also helps you when we're wanting to publish from this data. So those are very important considerations to take into mind. So we're going to move forward with what is the research question. So during the last 2 days, over the last 2 days, it's not the first time that we've heard this word research question. And so I know that you would be very familiar with what a research question is. So a research question is exactly that. It is a question. Okay, it's a question that we're posing about our research. There are some important characteristics about the research question, and among these characteristics is that the research question, it should be feasible, it should be specific, it should be relevant. We also don't want to have a research question that is not relevant. It should be researchable, and it should be very much focused. So when you're looking at the title of your research, whatever domain of research you're going to be researching in, your research question needs to be very much focused around that. So the research question, like I said, is exactly that. It is the question of the research. Both our qualitative research designs as well as our quantitative research designs will employ a research question or should have a research question. The way I usually like to go about this with my students is the research question is something that you're going to shut your laptop, you're going to shut your computer, you're going to sit with a piece of paper and a pen in front of you, and you are going to write the question that is going to ask why are you doing this, or what are you doing, what is the purpose of this research. We don't want any academic language, we don't want any like Oxford Dictionary words. We want it to make sense to you, and if you have to explain it to your Nana, then it should make sense to her as well. So that is the way in which I usually like to go about explaining to my students what and how they should go about formulating this research question. The research question is also sort of the center part of your research, because everything that you're going to do from there is going to be informed by this research question, and therefore it should be very specific, and you should ask yourself these questions when formulating the question. The first one would be, what is the problem that you are addressing or that you are trying to solve? Okay, like for example, we could say, what was the benefit of wearing a mask during COVID-19? So that could be a question that we've posed. So the problem that we're trying to address is, was there a benefit to mask wearing or was there not a benefit? Who cares about this problem? So would doing research on wearing a mask during the COVID-19 pandemic, would it affect the citizens? Would it affect the policymakers? Who exactly is it going to impact? What have other researchers or other practitioners done in this area? Would you be the very first person to be doing this? Has a lot more research being done on this? So if we use, for example, the mask wearing as an example, we can say, okay, so what is the benefit of wearing a mask? But maybe research has been done on the differences between a cloth mask, N95 mask, etc. What is the solution to the problem? So in the back of your mind, but we should be careful with this one. In the back of your mind, you should have a kind of a solution to the problem. So in the back of my mind, I would think that yes, mask wearing would be beneficial. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it disrupted the spread of the virus. So you should have some sort of thinking on what it is that you would want to do. And how can you demonstrate that your solution or your thinking is a good one? Okay. Then the next slide just goes about and sort of explains or gives examples of some of the research questions that one could pose. These are very sort of generic research questions. I was trying to think within the Faculty of Health Sciences, because I know that there are attendees across all the disciplines within our faculty. So I tried to include as much as I could from all the various disciplines, but in a way you can see that all of the research questions would somehow address the what, the where, the why, the when, or the how. So when you formulate in your research question, there is important considerations. Okay, so now if you have a page in front of you, you should have a scrap piece of paper in front of you, and you should be jotting down what you think your research question is going to be in one of those beautiful spidergrams that Dr. Morton showed us earlier today. We're going to move on to the next section, which is our research aim, objectives, and hypothesis. So the main goal of this section of the research is the overarching purpose of what your research project is going to be like. And I know working with specifically the master's students, the PhD students would sort of already have been through this, so a little bit more familiar. But working with the master's students, the minute you come to that part of the proposal that starts with research question, aims, and objectives, the student automatically is like, oh goodness, what am I going to do here? Because we do have to keep in mind that most of the disciplines in the faculty are training clinicians, not training academics or researchers, but training clinicians. So a lot of the time, postgraduate students leave, they qualify, they leave, they go to do their work, and then they come back after a few years and now having to get back into the system of academia. But once we're going to break it down today, and you'll see it really is pretty simple. So the first part that we start with is our research aim. Actually, you start with your hypothesis, but let's just start with aim here. Our research aim describes the main goal or the overarching purpose of our research project. It is the focal point that provides the reader with clarity on what your study is about. So when formulating your research aim, you also want to look at the question. Okay, so for example, if we're going to continue with our mask wearing COVID example, we could say that the aim of our study is to explore and describe the effects of wearing a N95 mask during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that is the way in which you would then formulate a research aim for your study. Okay, I've given a few examples, or two examples at the bottom of the screen. Sorry, two examples at the bottom of the screen on the research aim. Then the research objectives. So the research objectives then further go into your research aim and explain how it is you're going to go about identifying or coming to the solution of the question you've posed, and therefore the research aim. So your objectives are going to be the steps that you are going to take in order to be able to answer your research question and your research aim. So for example, if we continue with our COVID-19 example, we could perhaps say the first research objective would be to explore and describe your heart rate values, for example, when wearing an N95 mask during writing a test, maybe, okay? Your research objective also needs to be very specific. It needs to answer the who, the what, the where, the why, the when, the how as well. So the more information that you have in your research objective, the better it's going to be for you. Because the colleagues that are going to do presentations going throughout today will then explain to you how you write your conclusion and your discussion, and all of that for your thesis, your dissertation, and your treatise is going to answer your research aim and objectives. So a very, very important part of the research study. Then a research hypothesis. So a research hypothesis is a statement about an expected relationship between variables or an explanation of a particular occurrence that may happen. The research hypothesis needs to be specific, testable, and falsifiable. So the various departments within the faculty sometimes require you to have a research hypothesis and a research question, whereas other departments within the faculty only require you to either have a research question or a research hypothesis. So it's always best to check with your study supervisor or study promoter on which one it is that, that your department would go with. In terms of the research hypothesis, just to quickly summarize, there are three different types of research hypotheses. There's a simple research hypothesis, which is very simple. It's a relationship between a single dependent variable and a single independent variable. So that would be, for example, the relationship between wearing a mask and the spread of COVID-19. Okay. Then we move on to a little bit more of a complex hypothesis, which then says, for example, the relationship between a dependent and more than an independent variable and more than one a dependent variable and more than one independent variable. So for your complex hypotheses, we would, for example, identify the relationship between wearing a mask and the spread of COVID-19 as well as perhaps self-image. So it's two variables that we're looking at related to wearing a mask. And then a directional hypothesis is going to tell you whether, or going to say whether there's a positive or negative influence between these variables. So we could, for example, say wearing a mask has a poor effect on the spread of COVID-19. So we are basically saying what is the nature of this relationship from the get-go. The next slide also basically just outlines the way in which research hypotheses are sort of written, and this is specifically from the Department of Human Movement Science. So we would also, the way in which the research hypothesis is written is going to vary between the departments. I know, for example, departments like medical laboratory sciences and pharmacy would write a lot more of a scientific hypothesis using your H0 and H1, whereas other departments such as human movement science, we write a much more of a narrative hypothesis. So once again, your supervisor will guide you in that regard. When we come to the research methodology, okay, so methodology, and I remember my research methodology lecturer from when I was a student way back when, is an alumni of this university, Prof. Lange Pretorius. And I remember sitting in her first class and she gave the whole class about research methodology, and something about the word methodology just made me feel so anxious and made me feel like this is going to be a difficult section. But same like what we did with the research question, I'm going to tell you that a research methodology is exactly that. It is just the method that we're going to use to delineate our research or to describe our research. Okay. So it's very important to understand your research methodology because this is the plan that we're putting in place. Okay. So if we know the reason why we have to have this very comprehensive plan, we know that number one, it's going to show your colleagues and your supervisors and your external examiner and all of those important people that you understand your research and you understand the design of your research and you understand what you're putting forward. It also allows your study, having a good methodology, allows your study to be replicable. So your colleague or somebody else in the field can come and do the same study if you have properly described this research. It helps you identify and discuss methodological issues and how to mitigate these. Then the research design. The research design is, for example, the icing of the cake and how we're going to go about that, decorating this beautiful chocolate cake that we want at the end of it all. The research design is theoretically defined as the arrangement of conditions and collection of analysis of data and the manner in which we went about to get to the conclusion of our aims and the purpose of our study. So there are some important terms that you are going to find when looking at various research methodologies and designs. So it's summarized in this slide, but I want to just take you to this slide first, which is going to chat to you about explorative, descriptive, and causal or explanatory designs. So an explorative research design is going to explore. It's going to explore a phenomenon or an idea or a thought that you may have. Whereas a descriptive research design is going to describe something. So it's going to describe a relationship between one or more variables. It's going to describe the way in which people may feel. It's going to describe a situation, etc. And then the third broad category that we would find ourselves in would be explanatory research or causal research. Different departments call it differently. So explanatory research is going to explain what was this relationship or what was the reason for this event to occur, etc. Okay, so those are the three broad types of research that you will encounter. In your proposal, you would need to identify these and you would need to justify the use of them. Then we also have different types of research. So we have qualitative research, we have quantitative research, and we have mixed methods research. Okay, various departments use one or more of these research types more regularly. However, I must say, as research is progressing, there is a lot more of the third category, which is known as the mixed methods research. So qualitative research is a research type that goes about to explore. So it usually employs the use of focus group discussions, unstructured interviews, and stuff like that. So you're going to go to your participant and you're going to ask your participant, how do you feel about having to have worn a mask during COVID-19? And then you're going to hear their thoughts, their thinking behind it. Quantitative research, okay, this is the one where you are going to say, for example, that we're dealing, did you feel happy or sad when you were wearing a mask? And the participant needs to either choose happy or they need to either choose sad. So it deals with numbers and structured data. And the way in which this is analyzed is using statistical analyses, whereas thematic analysis is used to analyze qualitative data. Then we have mixed methods. So mixed methods is a combination of
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mixed methods is the combination of the two. So we use both qualitative and quantitative research designs. In my last 5 minutes, I just want to discuss one more type of research which we have been seeing a lot more at FBGSC from the various departments, and this is action research. So action research is research that takes place for improving a particular process that has taken place, okay? So it involves a method of action, evaluation, and reflection, and as part of the outcome of action research, the evaluation and reflection is the conclusion of that study. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that. And the other one would be case studies. So that would be, for example, where we specifically go and look at a specific case. It's important to note that for a case study, we may sometimes need to employ either qualitative or a quantitative approach in the way in which this data is going to be analyzed. And then I've put some really nice resources that you could take a screenshot of that just helps you in preparation for the methodology section of your proposal. Thank you.